This is one of the most disturbing cases in American criminal history. A 20-year-old man sits alone in a prison cell. It is the last night of his life. The state of Nebraska is hours away from ending it. Guards check on him throughout the night. They peer through the small window in his cell door, log what they see, and move on. What they write in that log is what will haunt everyone who reads it for decades to come. Not pacing, not praying, not writing final letters, not weeping into his hands in the dark, sleeping, deeply, undisturbed, as if tomorrow were just another morning. His name is Charles Raymond Starkweather, and in just a few hours, on the early morning of June 25, 1959, he will be strapped into an oak electric chair at the Nebraska State Penitentiary and executed for a killing spree so brutal, so merciless, and so completely without rational explanation that it will leave Nebraska, and the rest of America, permanently changed. 11 people are dead because of him, among them, a 2-year-old child, an elderly farmer, a teenage girl who stopped to help a stranger on the side of the road, a wealthy businessman and his wife, murdered inside their own home, a gas station attendant who had done nothing more than show up for his night shift, all of them gone, in just 8 days, across Nebraska and into Wyoming. Kindly subscribe and turn on the notification never to miss our deep dive drops, and tonight, we go inside those final 24 hours, minute by minute, from the last Supreme Court denial to the cold cuts he ate for his last meal. From the prison doctor who died on the floor just minutes before the execution, to the 5 separate electric surges that ended Starkweather's life at 12. But to understand why Charles Starkweather died in that chair, you first need to understand how he got there. Charles Raymond Starkweather was born on November 24, 1938, in Lincoln, Nebraska. He was the third of 7 children born to Guy and Helen Starkweather. His father worked as a carpenter, his mother waited tables. By all accounts they were hard-working, decent people who did their best. There was no severe abuse in that household, no documented neglect, no single catastrophic event that would later explain, or even partially explain, what Charles became, but Charles was different from early on. He was bow-legged, which gave him a distinct and awkward walk. He had a mild speech impediment. He struggled with his eyesight and needed thick glasses. From his earliest years in school, other children mocked him. His walk, the way he talked, the way he looked, it was relentless, and it carved something into him that never fully healed. He dropped out of school in the 9th grade. He drifted from job to job, garbage collector, warehouse hand, stock boy, nothing held. He had no ambition in the conventional sense, no plan, no goal. What he had was rage, a quiet, constant, building rage at a world he believed had dismissed him. He idolized James Dean, slicked back his red hair, wore denim and leather, cultivated the image of the outsider, the rebel, the misunderstood loner. But James Dean was a complicated, sensitive man. Charles Starkweather was something else entirely. By 1956, he was dating Carol Ann Fugate. She was 13 years old, he was 18, her parents deeply disapproved. They tried repeatedly to keep them apart. They told Starkweather to stay away from their daughter, and that decision would cost them their lives. But before that, there was a first kill, one that proved, beyond any doubt, what Charles Starkweather was capable of. December 1, 1957, Robert Calvert was 21 years old, working the overnight shift at the Crest service station on the outskirts of Lincoln, Nebraska. It was a cold Sunday night. Traffic was almost nothing. Around 3 in the morning, Starkweather walked in. He had a shotgun concealed under his coat. He demanded money from the register. Calvert handed it over, $108 in total. Starkweather forced him into a car at gunpoint, drove him several miles out of town to an isolated stretch of road, ordered him out of the vehicle, and shot him once in the head at point-blank range. He then drove back into Lincoln. He went home. He would later tell investigators that the killing had been easier than he expected, that once it was done, something inside him shifted, that the act of taking a life had felt, in his own words, like power. For 7 weeks, the murder of Robert Calvert went unsolved. No witnesses, no suspects, no leads. Starkweather walked free and said nothing, and then, in January of 1958, he stopped waiting. January 21, 1958, Starkweather arrived at the home of the Bartlett family in Lincoln. Carol Ann's mother, Velda Bartlett, her stepfather, Marion Bartlett, and her 2-year-old half-sister, Betty Jean. What happened inside that house will be debated for the rest of the century. Starkweather would offer different versions at different times. He claimed at one point that Marion Bartlett came at him with a rifle, that it was self-defense, that things escalated beyond what he intended, the physical evidence told a different story. Marion Bartlett was shot in the head and stabbed multiple times. Velda Bartlett was shot, then beaten so severely with a rifle but that her skull was fractured beyond recognition. 2-year-old Betty Jean Bartlett was stabbed in the throat. Her small body was carried out to the outhouse behind the home and left there. For the next 6 days, Starkweather and Carol and Fugate remained inside that house, 3 bodies decomposing around them. When relatives came to check on the family, they were turned away at the door. A handwritten note appeared on the front door. It read, "Stay away, everybody is sick with the flu." Neighbors later told police they had seen Carol and outside, playing in the yard, calm, cheerful. On January 27, they left, and the road became a killing field. Their first stop was the rural farmhouse of August Meyer, a 70-year-old farmer and family acquaintance of Starkweather's who lived alone on the outskirts of Bennett, Nebraska. Starkweather walked in and shot him in the head at close range. They ransacked the property looking for a working vehicle. Meyer's car wouldn't start. They took what they could and left on foot. That same afternoon, their vehicle became stuck in the mud on a back road. 2 teenagers, 17-year-old Robert Jensen and 16-year-old Carol King, stopped to offer help. It was an act of basic human decency that cost them everything. Starkweather pulled a gun. He forced them both into an abandoned storm cellar near the road. He shot Robert Jensen 6 times in the back of the head. Carol King was sexually assaulted and then shot. Her body was left partially clothed at the bottom of that cellar. 2 more people dead, their only offense, being decent human beings who stopped to help a stranger. January 28, 1958. Lincoln, Nebraska. Starkweather and Fugate, now driving a stolen car, targeted the home of C. Lauer Ward, a prominent Lincoln businessman. Ward, his wife Clara, and their household maid, Lillian Fenkel, were all home. All 3 were murdered. C. Lauer Ward was stabbed repeatedly and left in the main hallway. Clara Ward was stabbed multiple times in the bedroom. Lillian Fenkel, the maid, was bound, stabbed, and left in a closet upstairs. The home was ransacked. Cash, jewelry, and a car were taken. By now, Lincoln was in a state of full panic. Schools closed their doors. Armed men stood on street corners. Roadblocks went up across county and state lines. The governor of Nebraska mobilized the National Guard. Wire services carried the story across the country. A teenage boy and his young girlfriend were leaving a trail of bodies from Lincoln to the Wyoming border, and no one could stop them. They drove west. January 29, 1958, near Douglas, Wyoming, a local businessman named Joseph Sprinkle recognized the stolen Ward vehicle on a rural road and flagged down passing sheriff's deputies. A high-speed chase followed. Starkweather fired shots at pursuing officers through the rear window of the car, but a roadblock ahead forced him to brake. He brought the car to a stop on the side of the road. He got out with his hands up. No final shootout, no dramatic last stand, no blaze of glory. Carol and Fugate ran toward officers, screaming that she had been kidnapped. Starkweather was handcuffed and placed in a patrol car. 11 people were dead across 2 states. 8 days of absolute terror were over. The arrest of Charles Starkweather became international news within hours. Reporters descended on Lincoln. Photographers swarmed the Douglas, Wyoming County Jail where he was initially held. The story ran on front pages across the United States and in newspapers as far away as London. Investigators from Nebraska and Wyoming worked quickly. The evidence was overwhelming. Ballistics matched the weapons recovered. Fingerprints placed Starkweather at multiple crime scenes. Stolen property tied him directly to each location. Witnesses confirmed the stolen vehicles. The only real legal question was what to do about Carol and Fugate. She was 14 years old. She claimed she had been taken hostage from the moment Starkweather arrived at her family's home on January 21. She said he had threatened to kill her and anyone she tried to alert, that she had been too terrified to run, too afraid to signal for help, too paralyzed by fear to do anything other than comply. Starkweather told a different story, and then another story, and then another. In early statements, he said Fugate had been a willing participant, enthusiastic, even. He later walked that back, claiming he had forced her, that she played no role, that she was innocent. His account shifted so many times that investigators and jurors had little reason to trust any version of it. The physical evidence and witness testimony about Fugate's behavior during the spree were damning. She had appeared calm at multiple points. She had gone into stores. She had spoken to people without raising any alarm. She had, by multiple accounts, behaved not like a captive but like a companion. Psychiatrists examined Starkweather extensively before trial. They found no evidence of psychosis, no schizophrenia, no diagnosable mental illness that would have impaired his ability to understand his actions. His IQ tested at 110, which placed him comfortably above average. He was fully aware of what he was doing. He simply did not care. One examining psychiatrist wrote in his report, "He presents as a young man who killed because it gave him a sense of power he had never previously experienced in his life." The trial of Charles Starkweather began in May 1958, just 4 months after the murders. The proceedings were held in Lincoln. The courtroom was packed every single day. The prosecution's case was methodical and airtight: ballistics, crime scene evidence, stolen property, the testimony of law enforcement officers who had worked the scenes. The jury heard it all. Starkweather's defense team entered a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. His lawyers argued he could not distinguish right from wrong at the time of the killings, and that he was mentally unfit for trial. The jury deliberated for less than 24 hours, guilty of first-degree murder, sentence, death by electrocution. Starkweather received the verdict without visible reaction. He nodded once, slightly, and was led from the courtroom. Carol Ann Fugate was tried separately. Despite her claims of captivity, the jury found her guilty as an accomplice to first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison. She served 17 years before being paroled in 1976. She has maintained her innocence ever since. For Charles Starkweather, there would be no parole hearing, no second chance, no future to debate. Charles Starkweather was transferred to the Nebraska State Penitentiary in Lincoln and placed on death row, cell block C, a small concrete cell, a bunk, a toilet, a window the size of a hardback book. For nearly 2 years, his legal team fought to keep him alive. Appeal after appeal was filed, emergency motions, stays of execution requested in state courts, federal courts, and twice in the United States Supreme Court. 5 separate execution dates were set by the state. 4 times, the legal process intervened, courts delayed, appeals were granted. The switch was never thrown, but every door that opened eventually closed. Starkweather's behavior on death row disturbed guards and prison staff in ways that were difficult to articulate. Most men condemned to die go through a predictable emotional cycle: denial, anger, desperation, pleading, eventual resignation. It is a human pattern. It is what people do when they understand that their life is running out. Starkweather did not follow that pattern. He was calm from the beginning, cooperative, polite. He read comic books. He occasionally wrote letters. He talked to guards with the same casual ease he might have used talking to a neighbor over a fence. There was no outward sign of guilt, grief, or fear at any point during his time on death row. He gave interviews to journalists and to psychiatrists assigned by the court. In those interviews, he spoke about the murders with a chilling flatness. He admitted to the killings. He offered no remorse. He provided no meaningful explanation, no childhood wound, no moment of madness, no grievance that even partially accounted for what he had done. He told one reporter, "I always wanted to be somebody, guess I am now." He told another, "The first one is the hardest, after that it gets easier." He told his father, during one of the regular visits his family made to the penitentiary, that he had made peace with what was coming, that the execution was his way of paying for what he had done, that dying was his business, and he was ready for it. His father wept on those visits. His mother held his hand through the glass partition. Starkweather comforted them. He told them not to cry, that everything was fine. A veteran prison guard who supervised Starkweather during his time on death row later told a journalist, "Most men in that situation break down at some point. They cry, they rage against it, they bargain with God." Starkweather did none of that. It was like watching someone who had already decided they were gone. He was just waiting for the paperwork to catch up. By June of 1959, the paperwork had caught up. The Nebraska Supreme Court denied the final state-level appeal with no elaboration and no delay. The court acted swiftly. No oral arguments were heard. No stay was granted. The United States Supreme Court refused to intervene. Charles Starkweather would die on the morning of June 25, 1959. The execution was set for 12:01 a.m. This time, there would be no last-minute filing that changed anything. June 24, 1959, early morning. The guards who checked on Starkweather throughout the preceding night found nothing to note in the prison log. He slept, deeply, they said, without interruption, without apparent anxiety. At 6 in the morning, a breakfast tray was brought to his cell, standard prison issue: oatmeal, a boiled egg, a slice of bread, weak coffee. Starkweather picked at the food, ate a bite or two, and pushed the tray aside. He had never been much for breakfast. He spent the morning on his bunk, staring at the ceiling. Occasionally he stood and paced, 3 steps forward, 3 steps back, then sat again. He requested water twice. He did not ask to read anything. He never liked reading. Guards watching him during those morning hours would later describe a quality in his stillness that was difficult to put into words, not the stillness of a man at peace, not the stillness of a man resigned, something different, something closer to the stillness of a man who had simply stopped caring about the world. On the other side of the cell door, 1:30 p.m., his legal team arrived for what all of them knew would be their final meeting. The only option remaining was an emergency direct appeal to the United States Supreme Court in Washington, a last reach for a last door that almost certainly would not open. They laid it out for him. Starkweather listened without interrupting. He did not argue, he did not ask questions, he did not express hope, frustration, or fear. One of his attorneys would later say that sitting in that room with him felt deeply strange, that Starkweather seemed almost indifferent to the outcome, that he gave the impression of a man who had not just accepted death but who had, somewhere in the preceding months, quietly decided to welcome it. But the lawyers were bound by professional oath. They filed the emergency motion anyway. Every door had to be knocked on, even the ones that would not open. 5:30 p.m. Word came back from Washington. The United States Supreme Court would not intervene. No stay of execution, no delay, no written explanation. The last door had closed. After nearly 2 years of legal appeals, county courts, state courts, federal courts, emergency motions, direct petitions, there was nothing left. No court to call, no judge to reach, no legal mechanism left to trigger. In less than 7 hours, Charles Starkweather would be dead. Prison officials granted Starkweather a final visit with his family, his parents, a few of his siblings, one last time together inside the Nebraska State Penitentiary. Those present at that visit would struggle afterward to describe what it was like. His mother wept, his father barely held himself together, his siblings sat in stunned, helpless silence. Starkweather spoke to them calmly. He told his father not to cry, he told his mother everything was going to be fine. He held his composure through the entire visit in a way that those watching found more unsettling than any amount of weeping or rage would have been. He did not apologize, not to his family, not for the 11 lives taken. He spoke only about the present, about the visit, about the people in the room with him. At just 20 years old, Charles Starkweather was calm in a way that went beyond bravery or resignation. He was, by every account from everyone who saw him that evening, already somewhere else. The visit lasted approximately 45 minutes. When it ended, he stood, embraced his parents, and was escorted back to his cell. He did not look back as he left the room. Prison officials offered Starkweather a traditional last meal, a steak, potatoes, whatever he wanted within reason. He declined. He asked instead for something simple, a plate of cold cuts, ham, turkey, sliced cheese, bread, a glass of milk. He ate quietly, without comment, without ceremony. He finished everything on the plate, pushed it aside, and lay back down on his bunk. No drama, no final ritual of any kind, just a man eating a plate of cold cuts on the last night of his life. 10:30 p.m. A prison chaplain arrived at Starkweather's cell. He was there to offer counsel, prayer, and, if Starkweather wanted it, to hear a final confession. Starkweather thanked him politely and declined. He said he had nothing to confess, that he had made his peace. He asked the chaplain how he was doing. They exchanged a few words. The chaplain stayed nearby but did not push. Starkweather talked casually with the guards during these final hours. One of them later recalled that he was relaxed, genuinely relaxed, in a way that was almost impossible to square with the circumstances. At one point, he looked at the guards standing watch and said, with no particular emphasis, "I've got a feeling tonight's the night." No drama, no fear, just a quiet acknowledgement of what was already decided. Then something went wrong. Inside the walls of the Nebraska State Penitentiary, with less than 30 minutes remaining before the scheduled execution, the doctor assigned to pronounce Starkweather dead suffered a massive heart attack. Dr. B. A. Finkel, the prison physician, collapsed on the floor of the penitentiary. He died there, minutes before the man he was supposed to pronounce dead was scheduled to enter the execution chamber, a death before the death. The shock that rippled through the staff was immediate. Procedures halted, officials scrambled, another physician was summoned from across town, called from his home in the middle of the night, paperwork was redone, the chain of custody for the execution procedure was carefully re-established, but the clock did not stop. the state of Nebraska was going to carry out this execution, and it was going to do so on schedule. 11:50 p.m. The warden and a small team of guards arrived at Starkweather's cell. It was time. Starkweather was already prepared when they got there. As if he had been waiting. The cell door was unlocked. As the guards moved to escort him out, Starkweather looked at the deputy warden and allowed himself one final moment of defiance. He looked the man directly in the eyes and said, with a faint smirk, "What's your hurry?" Dark, brazen, completely consistent with who he had been from the beginning. Then he stepped forward and walked with them down the corridor, steady, unresisting, at his own pace, as if choosing to walk rather than being led, through the steel doors, down the hall, into the execution chamber. Charles Starkweather entered the execution chamber at the Nebraska State Penitentiary. Between 30 and 40 witnesses were present. Journalists from major Nebraska newspapers, state officials, prison administrators, representatives of the legal system that had convicted him. Several of the witnesses were people who had lost family members to Starkweather's killing spree. The room was quiet. At the center of the chamber stood the oak electric chair. Starkweather was walked directly to it and strapped in without delay. Leather restraints were secured across his chest, his arms, and his legs. Electrodes were attached. One to his shaved head and one to his right leg. He did not resist at any point. The warden stepped forward and asked if he had any final words. Charles Starkweather shook his head. No. No statement, no apology, no message for the families of the people he had killed, no final declaration of any kind, nothing. A leather blindfold was placed over his eyes. Final procedural checks were completed. The executioner took his position behind a partition, hand on the switch. One reporter who witnessed the execution wrote the following day, "He went to his death without drama and without struggle, just silence." The warden gave the signal, the switch was thrown. 2,200 volts of electricity surged through the body of Charles Starkweather. His muscles locked instantly and completely, his hands clenched, the leather restraint strained hard against the chair. The current held, then it was reduced, then it surged again, then again. 5 separate charges in total, each one measured, each one precisely delivered. The procedure was exactly as the state had designed it, clinical, controlled, without complication. No sound came from Charles Starkweather at all. Witnesses later described the scene as efficient and quiet. Several of them described feeling something unexpected, not relief, not satisfaction, but a deep and hollow stillness, as if the room itself were waiting for something that never came. After the 5th surge, the current was cut, the room went entirely still. The newly summoned physician stepped forward. He checked for a pulse, he listened for any sound of a heartbeat, then he looked up. 12:04 a.m., Charles Raymond Starkweather was pronounced dead. He was 20 years old. He had been on death row for less than 2 years. He had carried out his killing spree just 17 months before his execution. He died the youngest person executed in Nebraska in the 20th century, and he would be the last person the state put to death for more than 33 years. His body was removed from the chair, an autopsy was conducted. He was buried at Yucca Cemetery in Lincoln, Nebraska. His grave was not marked with a headstone, just grass, just dirt, as if the ground itself wanted no part of remembering him. The execution of Charles Starkweather was supposed to close the book. For the families of his 11 victims, in some ways it did. Justice, however imperfect, had been carried out. The man responsible for their loss was gone, but the questions that case raised have never fully been answered. What creates a Charles Starkweather? What combination of anger, emptiness, and moral absence produces a person capable of killing 11 people in 8 days, including a 2-year-old child, without hesitation and without remorse? Was it the bullying? Powerlessness? The desperate need to be somebody in a world that made him feel like nobody? Psychiatrists, criminologists, and historians have spent decades trying to understand it. None of them have arrived at a complete answer, because there may not be one. What we do know is this: 11 people deserved to live their full lives. They deserved futures that were stolen from them by a 19-year-old who wanted the world to know his name. The world knows it, but history does not remember Charles Starkweather as a rebel or a folk hero. History remembers him as exactly what he was, a young man who killed the powerless and the innocent to feed an ego that left 11 empty chairs at 11 different tables. He died in that chair, the world moved on, and that is exactly what he deserved. If this story stayed with you, if it made you think, made you feel something, made you want to understand, then this channel is for you. We cover true crime the right way, with verified facts, with respect for the victims, without shortcuts and without sensationalism. Kindly subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload, and if this video moved you, leave a comment below. Tell us what you think, your voice matters in this community. This is Alleged Crimes. We will see you in the next one.